Let's go. Here are threats in puzzle position. Knight takes pawn. Bishop takes pawn, check. Queen takes pawn. Pawn takes pawn. Checks in this position are. Bishop takes pawn, check. The answer is. Bishop takes pawn, check. King takes bishop. Queen to h5, check. King to g8. Rook to d3. Bishop takes pawn. Pawn takes bishop. Let's see the next puzzle. Threats in puzzle position are. Bishop takes knight. There are no checks in this position. The answer is. Bishop takes knight. Queen takes bishop. Rook to e8. Queen takes rook, check. Knight takes queen. One more. Threats in this position are. Rook takes pawn, check. Here are checks in puzzle position. Rook takes pawn, check. Here is the solution to the puzzle. Rook takes pawn, check. King takes rook. e7. Rook takes pawn. Promotes to queen. Next, puzzle position vulnerabilities are. There are no threats in this position. There are no checks in this position. The best move in puzzle position is. Rook to b6. Rook to e6, check. King to d3. King to e7. Rook takes rook, check. King takes rook. King to c4. Another puzzle. Here are threats in puzzle position. Pawn takes bishop. Pawn takes pawn, check. Knight takes rook. Knight takes bishop. Pawn takes pawn. Queen takes bishop. Here are checks in puzzle position. Pawn takes pawn, check. Knight to e7, check. Here is the solution to the puzzle. Queen takes bishop. Pawn takes pawn. Queen to h8, check. King to f7. Queen takes knight, check. King to e8. Queen to g7. Bishop to b5. Queen takes rook, check. Another one. The threats are. There are no threats in this position. Checks in puzzle position are. a5, check. c5, check. The best move in puzzle position is. h3. a5. b5. h4. g4. One more. Threats in puzzle position are. Queen takes pawn. Queen takes bishop. Rook takes rook. Knight takes pawn. There are no checks in this position. The answer is. Queen takes bishop. Pawn takes queen. Rook takes rook. Another puzzle. The threats are. Queen takes pawn. Queen takes pawn, check. Here are checks in puzzle position. Queen takes pawn, check. Queen to f1, check. Queen to d1, check. Queen to b1, check. The answer is. Queen to f1, check. King to h2. Queen to f4, check. Another puzzle. Here are threats in puzzle position. Bishop takes pawn. Pawn takes pawn. Queen takes pawn. Queen takes queen. Bishop takes pawn. There are no checks in this position. Solution to the puzzle is. Queen takes queen. Bishop takes queen. f3. Bishop to e3, check. King to h1. Next, let us look at threats in puzzle position. Bishop takes pawn. Queen takes pawn, check. Checks in this position are. Queen to b8, check. Queen takes pawn, check. Here is the solution to the puzzle. Bishop to e3. Rook takes bishop. Queen takes rook. One more. The threats are. There are no threats in this position. The checks are. Rook to g7, check. Rook to d6, check. Here is the solution to the puzzle. Bishop to d4. Bishop takes bishop. Queen takes bishop. Queen takes rook. Queen takes queen. Let us go to the next puzzle. Let us look at threats in puzzle position. Pawn takes pawn. Here are checks in puzzle position. g5, check. The puzzle is solved using. King to c4. Pawn takes pawn. Pawn takes pawn. Next puzzle, let us look at threats in puzzle position. Bishop takes pawn, check. Bishop takes knight. Knight takes knight. Knight takes bishop. Here are checks in puzzle position. Bishop takes pawn, check. The puzzle is solved using. Knight takes knight. d5. Knight to d6. Pawn takes bishop. Knight takes bishop. Next puzzle, here are the threats. Queen takes rook. Queen takes queen. Queen takes pawn. Let us look at checks in puzzle position. Bishop to b3, check. Rook to e8, check. Answer to this puzzle is rook to e7. Queen takes queen. Rook takes queen. Rook to f7. Bishop to b3. Bishop takes knight, check. King to g1. Let's continue. The threats are rook takes pawn. Checks in this position are knight to e7, check. Solution to the puzzle is knight to e7, check. King to g7. Knight takes bishop. One more. Let us look at threats in puzzle position. Rook takes pawn. Bishop takes rook. Bishop takes rook. Checks in this position are bishop to e7, check. Bishop to e5, check. Answer to this puzzle is bishop takes rook. Rook takes bishop, check. King takes rook. Let us go to the next puzzle. The threats are there are no threats in this position. There are no checks in this position. Solution to the puzzle is g4, a5. King to d6. a6. King to c7. King to c5. g3. Let us go to the next puzzle. The threats are bishop takes bishop. Let us look at checks in puzzle position. Queen to a4, check. Solution to the puzzle is knight to f4. Queen to c4. d3. Bishop takes bishop. Pawn takes queen. Next puzzle, threats in puzzle position are rook takes pawn. Rook takes pawn. Knight takes pawn, check. Checks in this position are queen to a3, check. Knight to e2, check. Knight takes pawn, check. The puzzle is solved using queen to a3, check. Queen to b2. Knight takes pawn, check. Bishop takes knight. Rook takes bishop. Another puzzle. Here are the threats. Queen takes knight. Bishop takes knight. Rook takes knight. There are no checks in this position. The answer is d6. Knight takes pawn. Queen to b3, check. King to h8. Queen takes rook. Let us go to the next puzzle. Here are the threats. Pawn takes pawn. Queen takes pawn. Queen takes pawn, check. Queen takes knight, check. Queen takes rook, check. Checks in puzzle position are rook to d1, check. Queen takes pawn, check. Queen to f2, check. Queen to g1, check. Queen takes knight, check. Queen to d2, check. Queen takes rook, check. Queen to c3, check. The best move in puzzle position is queen to d2, check. King to f1. Bishop to c4. Rook takes bishop. Knight takes rook. Another one. Here are the threats. Rook takes rook. Queen takes queen. Queen takes knight. Pawn takes pawn. There are no checks in this position. Answer to this puzzle is queen takes queen. Rook takes rook, check. King takes rook. Knight takes queen, check. King to h8. Rook to e1. Pawn takes pawn. Let us go to the next puzzle. The threats are there are no threats in this position. There are no checks in this position. The puzzle is solved using rook to e8. Bishop to c1. Rook to e1. Let's continue. Puzzle position vulnerabilities are there are no threats in this position. Let us look at checks in puzzle position. Promotes to queen, check. Promotes to bishop, check. King to f4, check. King to d4, check. King to d5, check. The best move in puzzle position is rook to d4. King to d8. e4. Next, puzzle position vulnerabilities are there are no threats in this position. Checks in this position are knight to c3, check. Knight to d4, check. The puzzle is solved using king to d4. King takes pawn. King to c3. Knight to d3. King takes knight. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe.